Hello, my name's Jonathan Clark. Welcome to part 3 of my tutorial series about basic audio recording. So the point of this series is it's kind of designed for either amateur musicians or maybe a little bit for professional musicians who don't know a whole lot about studio recording technology. And the point is basically to teach you some background about how recording works in a studio environment. And we're going to apply a lot of this to home studio use so that amateurs can kind of fool around. In case you want to post videos on YouTube, just produce your own tracks to share with your friends, or even in a semi-professional manner once you get a little bit more comfortable and familiar with all the technology and techniques. The first two videos that I've done already in this series, first one was very simple and just talked about how to film yourself using either a portable audio recorder or the microphone on a video camera. The second tutorial, what I did was I talked about the beginnings of multi-track recording. So we went into some basic information about sound cards and we multi-tracked a session, just 2 tracks, but they came in simultaneously and we edited those and tidied up the audio a little bit so it sounds a little better than the original recording. And in that video I also talked a little bit about basic microphones, dynamic mics versus condenser mics. So this video, part 3, we're going to expand on multi-track recording, and I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do yet. I'll figure that out in half an hour. But basically I'm going to play some sort of song, and I'll probably do, at a minimum, we'll do a piano track, a stereo piano track, and then we'll add an acoustic guitar layer on top of that, a mono track. And then depending on how I feel, depending on what the song is, I might even add a strings track or a bass track or maybe a vocals track. I don't know. We'll see. I don't consider myself to be a great singer, but that doesn't stop me, and it shouldn't stop you either. Have fun with music. So in the last video, I used a fairly good high-end sound card, an external USB sound card called the Octacapture from Roland. That was a 10 input, 10 output card, probably around $600 or $700 Canadian or US. So that's probably out of the price range of quite a few of you who are watching. So what I'm going to do in this video is we're going to backtrack a little bit and we're going to go with a sound card that's a little bit more simple and definitely cheaper. What I'm going to use is, I just went out and picked up this Scarlett 8i6 from Focusrite. And I'm going to use that in the next couple of videos here just to show you you don't have to have the fanciest equipment to be able to learn how to do this stuff and to play with it and have fun. Okay, this sound card is only about $250 here in Canada. It's got the ability to still do a couple tracks of input at the same time, simultaneously, and so we can use this to layer, and you know, our recording today is going to have at least 3 or 4 separate tracks, even though they won't all come in at the same time. So if you want to look at some of those first couple tutorials that I did, if you haven't watched those already and you're really new to this, I'd advise you to go back and watch them. I'll put a link right here on the YouTube video. That's a link to the videos page on my own main website, and you should click on that briefly right now, bookmark it, come back to it later, or go watch some of the other videos first. Okay, so that's going to have a list of all the different stuff that I've done tutorial videos on, and you'll have to watch out because it's kind of broken down into, there's sections on DJing, there's sections on different audio software packages like Ableton, ProTools, Cubase, all that sort of stuff. There's sections on mixing, DJ sets, stuff like that, sections on audio recording. Anyway, so bookmark that, that's your best source to find all this stuff out. And let's get right into things right now, and we'll open up this Scarlett 8i6 and see what we've got. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Basically, the Scarlett 8i6, the 8i means that it has 8 inputs. We'll explore how those inputs work in a second, and the 6 is 6 outputs. One thing that's very notable, well, a couple things. First of all, it's a USB 2.0 interface, which is good. That should work on most Macs or PCs. Also, I see this says ProTools 9 ready. That tells me something, because when I filmed this as of today, ProTools 10 has been out for about 1.5 years already, which means this has been in the box for a couple of years at least. So the drivers may be out of date. So we'll get into that in a minute. Let's see what we've got. Troubleshooting, software download. Okay, so in the documentation and whatnot, we have a copy of a program called Base Station, and we have a copy of Ableton Lite Live, and we have the resources disk, so that's probably got the drivers and everything. There's a registration card, should register eventually. And we have our USB interface, so that's what plugs into the back of the interface. This is called a USB 2.0 B connection, and this is called an A connection. And we have, oh yes, I remember seeing one of these before. This really confused me. This kind of plug is not native to North America, and so you may wonder how this all works. So I can use this in Canada or the States or whatever. You have to press in this little button. I found that hard to get off the first time I played with one of these. And so basically clicks in, and so you've got a normal power supply. So these pieces probably can go back into the box. I won't need those. You might, depending what continent you live on. And okay, so nothing else in the box. And I'm not actually going to use the driver disk. I'm going to see what I can find online. Okay, so basically with this unit, on the back we have SPDIF inputs and outputs. So that's a coax type of digital in and out. There's the plug for our power cord. We have MIDI in and out. I'm going to get into MIDI in part 4 of this audio series. We won't do any MIDI work today. USB, there's our B plug for the cord, the USB cord. So we have 6 different 1/4 inch outputs. These will have line level signals coming out, probably at +4 dBu. I'll have to double check that in the manual. And these two can be used as line inputs, 3 and 4. Okay, that seems a little odd that 3 and 4 are on the back. Well, not really when you look at the front, because these are the inputs 1 and 2, and so they make them a little easier to get at. They're on the front. So 1 and 2, each one of them can either be an XLR input, or it can be a tip ring sleeve 1/4 inch input. So if I wanted to record 4 different inputs at once, I could have, for instance, one mono microphone going into one mono mic going into 2, and 2 line outs from a digital piano going into 3 and 4, and I could be recording all 4 of those signals at once. And in fact, I suspect I could probably also simultaneously have a MIDI cord coming from the keyboard, and so I could have 2 tracks, the left and right channels of my piano coming through as an audio recording, 2 audio tracks, and simultaneously I could have a MIDI track that's getting the exact same sort of information, although it's a different type of signal entirely. So basically I'd have 2 copies of my piano playing at once. I'd have the stereo audio signal from these 2 mono inputs, and I could have a MIDI track that I could put a virtual piano on top of, virtual studio technology instrument of a piano, and I could hear a different type of piano from the same notes that I played when I recorded the audio. I could also, if I wasn't, let's say I wasn't singing, I could run perhaps the direct from a DI box or directly from a guitar and a bass, 2 1/4 inch chords in there, and a piano in the back. So if we had 3 musicians, none of us were using microphones, we could use the 4 quarter-inch lines that way simultaneously. And so we've got a pair of input gain controls for the front two channels. We have a phantom power switch. If you're using a condenser mic on either ports 1 or 2, you will need phantom power to be on. It's a 48-volt phantom power. And if you're using a condenser mic which uses a quarter-inch plug line level signal, then you don't need to have the phantom power on. And then for monitoring, that's for the signal going out, and we have a headphone jack. Uses just a standard quarter-inch headphone. And remember how the box says 6 outputs? Well, I'm not sure if you would consider the 6 outputs to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because remember the headphone is a stereo output. But I would consider that not to be what they're counting in the 6 outputs. It's probably these 6. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so there's your stereo volume. And that's really all we need. So what I'm going to do is hook this up right now, and I will load the drivers, and I'll make sure it's working before we go any further. Okay, I'm going to also record quickly the process of installing the drivers here, just in case any of you have questions about that. So let's see what we can find. And so let's see what we can find. 8i6, USB 2.0 driver. What have we got? We've got the user guide. Let's download that. And we have mix control. I don't need that right now. I don't need plugin suite, iPad mappings, suite. No, let's just go for the driver only. Okay, and apparently I downloaded that twice. Excellent, excellent. This will install the driver on your computer. Next, ready to use. You can now connect your device to this computer. Okay, so make sure that the interface is unplugged, not plugged into the computer when you first do this. Finish. Now I see something's happening down here. Let's just wait for a second and see what happens. It's probably not a bad idea on Windows systems to, when you download the driver package, instead of just clicking on them normally to to open and run them, do a right click and run as administrator, just in case. I didn't in this case. Most of the time it works without running as an administrator, but it certainly can't hurt. And I think we are set, good to go. I'm going to save that PDF manual on my desktop so I can close this if I need to later. Now let's just see if the sound card shows up in Audition. My system's audio hardware settings have changed. Would I like to review? Yes. And well, let's see what we have. Okay, so default input, we'll set it to line in Scarlett 8i6. That's a good sign. Device changes can modify channel mappings, input assignments, and affect recording underway. Do you want to continue? Yes. Default output. So I do have the choice of continuing to use my laptop speakers, or I can use this as the output. And I think I'd rather use this and then plug my headphones into the headphone jack, and then I can control my volume on this quite easily. So let's go with line out. And for device class, do we have an ASIO driver? Oops, that just messed everything up. Focusrite, USB 2.0 audio driver. Yes. Settings. Okay, sample rate 44,000. Okay, well I think that's going to work. Let's just set up a multi-track session and we'll see what happens. So what are we going to call this? Browse. Let's create a directory and what am I going to play? Let's do a Neil Young song. I don't know which one yet. So folder location Neil Young and audio recording 03 tutorial and sample rate 44.1, bit depth 16 bits, stereo. And for inputs, default stereo input, let's go, so it looks like 01 is our front mic here, 02 is our other front mic, and then 3 and 4 would be on the back, 3 and 4. So I think for starters, what I'm going to do is I'll set up lines 3 and 4, because whichever song I play here, it's going to be piano track first. Output, audio output to the master, yes, I like that. ARM for record. And I think we're all set to go. So I'm going to hit Control S to save that. And I'm going to pause everything here for a minute and I'm going to figure out what song I'm going to play. Something I want to point out, when I just set up that session, I set up a folder on the C drive. The C drive is my operating system drive. And I highly recommend that you normally do not use the same drive. You don't store your session files on your operating system drive. Most computers have at least 2 drives, and you should have your operating system and programs running off one drive and your session files running off a different one. That way both can be accessed and kind of simultaneously, so there's less likely to be bottlenecks in your bandwidth as your drives are trying to read and write stuff. Now the only reason I broke that rule is because my laptop that I'm using has a solid state drive on the C drive, which is quite fast, and it has a normal eSATA drive on the data drive, which is quite slow. So going with that recommendation of storing your session files on a different drive than the operating system, that makes sense if both drives are the same type. So i.e. both are SATA drives, eSATA drives, or both are old IDE drives, both are SSDs, whatever. In that case, separate them. But since my data drive is a very slow eSATA drive, I'm going to break my rule and store the session files on my C drive, the SSD. So I just quickly read the user manual that was online about the Focusrite 8i6, and there's a couple things that you should know that I found interesting. First of all, there's some mix control software with it, and it recommends that you install that because it gives you additional options for recording, routing, monitoring, setting sample rates, stuff like that. I'm going to see if I can use it without that, just kind of as a generic, you know, let it talk directly to my DAW, let it talk directly to Audition and see what happens. But the mix control software may make some things better. The sound card does not work on the USB 1.0 or 1.1 ports. They say it'll probably crash, so recommend that you check and make sure you've got the USB 2.0 version. I assume it'll also work fine on a USB 3.0 port. And in addition, they recommend that you plug the sound card directly into a USB port on the computer. Don't go through a USB hub. Like if you got 3 or 4 different, or just say you've only got a couple of USB ports on your computer, and so you've got a hub hooked up to one of them to give you more overall USB ports, the sound card is probably the most important, communications-wise, the most important piece of equipment that you'll have hooked up to it. So make sure the sound card gets a priority in the whole system and goes directly to the computer. Like for instance, if you had the sound card and an external drive both hooked up through a USB port, through a USB hub, there's going to be probably so much bandwidth coming between the two of them that the single connection from the hub to the computer might get overwhelmed, and you'll get dropouts and all sorts of problems. The unit does need the power supply plugged in. It will not get enough power from the USB line. Now, it says it's got 8 inputs and 12 outputs when you go into the software, which is a little bit interesting. Now, the 8 inputs, how does that work? Well, 2 of them are internally rerouted, so they would go right back into your DAW as you're doing stuff. So, to try and explain how this works, let's assume that let's say that you've got 6 tracks of audio and you are trying to put some real-time processing effects on them, like reverb units, stuff like that. It's possible for you to route the output from stuff as you're playing, and it comes back in a loop internally to these 2 additional magic number 7 and 8 inputs. And so your DAW can record what's coming back through the sound card at the same time as stuff is playing out. So that would be a way for you to do a live capture of stuff that's happening as you're playing through session in real time. It does recommend going into the mix control software if your input levels don't seem right. For instance, on all 4 TRS inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can adjust parameters on it. So like on 3 and 4, you can adjust whether it's a high gain or a low gain input. So for instance, 3 and 4 are switchable between 16 dBUs and -10 dBV. So if you've got stuff plugged in, depending what it's coming from, like a CD player adapted to 1/4-inch plugs, or maybe directly from a keyboard or something, if it seems your inputs are really too soft or too loud, I would recommend that you check in the mix control software and check your settings, because you may be able to put it at the other setting and your input signal all of a sudden is going to make a lot more sense. It's going to be kind of in a nice normal range instead of way too soft or way too loud. The gain range on the XLR inputs on the front goes from +13 decibels to +60 decibels. So remember in the last video I said a phono preamp usually boosts by 40 decibels, and I couldn't think of how much a mic preamp boosts. That's because it's not standard. It can vary. So depending on what your microphone is, you know, maybe you've got a mic that's only putting out, that only needs 24 decibels of voltage, 24 decibels of boost to the signal to be usable in your DAW, or maybe you've got a different mic that needs 50-some decibels of boost. So you've got a wide variety of options on the XLRs on the front. Now, it also says that the outputs 1 through 4 are TRS, which is kind of odd because we know that TRS is capable of being a stereo signal, but we've been under the impression that each channel is a mono, carries a mono signal through it. So this seems a little bit confusing at first, but you'll get a clue about what's really going on when you see the line in the manual that says that the stereo headphones on the front, the single TRS jack that gives you a dual, like a stereo signal in your headphones, that can also be routed to outputs 3, 4. So I think what they're saying is that if you take your stereo outputs from your headphone and you want them coming out the back, it can't go to just one of those things because they're not really stereo. That signal would go to 3 and 4 to give you the 2 mono channels that make up your stereo signal. So I think what they're saying is each of these plugs in the back, even though it's capable of TRS plugs, tip ring sleeve stereo plugs, what happens, it's just the mono signal going through each one, and it's just that if you happen to have a cord that has TRS plugs on the end instead of TS plugs on the end, even though it looks like it's a stereo cord, you can use it and your mono will work correctly. I believe that's exactly what they're saying. Now, as far as a song, what I'm going to do, I said I was going to play a Neil Young song, Canadian musician, very, very famous here in Canada and around the world. I'm going to play a song from his third album. The album's called After the Gold Rush. And I may as well give you some background on these songs. You know, it's always good to learn about music. So anyway, you may have heard of a group called Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. A bunch of hippies played folk music. I mean that in a good way. I love them. Very famous from Woodstock. I think they played Sweet Judy Blue Eyes was a huge song that they played at Woodstock. And I'm sure they played quite a few songs at Woodstock. Anyway, they released an album as a group called Deja Vu, which was a huge, huge album for them. And then immediately after Deja Vu, each of the four members of the group, so David Crosby, Stephen Stills, Graham Nash, and Neil Young, each of the four of them released a solo album. And After the Gold Rush is the solo album that Neil Young released right after Deja Vu in 1970. And After the Gold Rush had quite a few hits. The title track was not really a huge hit, After the Gold Rush, but that's the song I'm going to play. And Bob Mercereau lives up the road in Fredericton. He's got a couple books, the Top 100 Canadian Singles. He has an older book called the Top 100 Canadian Albums. The After the Gold Rush album, he ranked as the number 3 Canadian album of all time. So that's why I wanted to pick the title track from that album, even though this particular song itself, the title track, did not even make it in his Top 100 Canadian Singles. But I like it. So let's get things set up, and I will start with the keyboard track. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is try and add a bass line to this. I'm not going to bring out my bass because it's not actually here where I'm recording. So I'm going to have to try and emulate it on the piano, which is what a lot of you will do because you may not be bass players or may not have basses. Now, first thing to do, when you're recording any instrument, try to be realistic, if possible, about what the instrument can do. So for instance, if you're recording a drum kit, the drummer can really only hit 2 drums at the same time. So if you try to program a fake drum line with a computer, don't have it hitting 3 things at once, because someone who knows music really well will go, wait a sec, the drummer can't do that. That's physically not possible unless he's a 3-armed drummer. So for the same reason, with the bass guitar, I know that the lowest note on a normal bass guitar is this low E. So I am going to try not to play any notes below the low E because it is not possible with a normal bass guitar to do that. Now, having said that, there are 5-string basses out there, that's what I've got. I've got an Ibanez 5-string bass, and so the low string is actually a B. But I'm going to, because many bass players don't have that type of guitar, I'm going to try and avoid playing anything below this E, just out of convention. So what I've done is I've armed another track here. I'm only going to arm one this time because a bass normally comes through in mono, and I'm going to say that's coming in mono from mic 1, which is the left mono output of the piano, and I'm going to turn off recording in these 2. Now let's see what happens if we press play. Okay, so the only drawback is that I can't actually, that's not playing out, so the cameras aren't going to hear what's going on with the recording. But basically I'm going to play this with the headphones on, and so in the headphones I'll be able to hear what I played last time, and at the same time I will be recording into track 3. Because I've turned off the record buttons in these 2 tracks, it won't overwrite what I've already recorded, and I've already hit Control S to save the session just to be safe. So I've got track number 3 armed for recording, and as I said in the last video, it's smart to rename these tracks before you start recording. So I'm going to call that bass right now. I should have done that with these 2, of course. Anyway, set for record, and this track is going to be a little bit choppy because I wasn't playing to a metronome last time, so I have to kind of anticipate and remember the timing that I did when I played the piano, which is very off and on, like I'm jumping up and down in tempo a lot. So it's going to be hard. Some of my bass notes are not going to hit at the same time as they should. They'll be just a fraction of a second too early or too late. And so the bass line is not going to line up very well with my piano line, unfortunately. Are there solutions to this? First thing would be if I played with a metronome at the start. That might make it easier. But then you kind of lose some of the feeling in a song like this, which doesn't really want to be to a rigid tempo. So what I'll do is I'll just record it, we'll hope for the best, and we'll do a little bit of editing afterwards and see if we can fix some of my timing problems with the software. Okay, that was pretty rough, but that's good, because that will give us a chance to do some editing and learn some stuff there. So I think what's going to happen is I'm not going to even bother doing a vocal track this time, because the point with this video, number 3, is more about multi-track recording and whatnot, and when I get into more vocal stuff, I'd rather focus on the vocals. So let's stick to the piano and the bass, and we'll add a string line. We'll do exactly the same thing. We'll take off record right now, and we will turn on record in track 4, but we'll call it strings. And let's see what we've got for sounds. Okay, I don't know if I want the strings to be to have that much presence in the mix. So I think what I'll do is I'll go with that center setting, which doesn't have a lot of treble, not nearly as much as this one. Yeah, let's do that. And the strings are going to be pretty quiet in the mix when we finally do our editing, but that's okay. The point is going to be to keep them low and just give it a little bit more presence. So let's turn our speaker volume up so I can hear better. I haven't changed. This piano has 2 different volumes. It has a speaker volume, which controls the 2 speakers, or the headphone jack if I'm listening. But remember, my headphones are plugged into the sound card right now, not into the headphone jack on the piano. And the other volume is the line out, and that controls the amount of signal coming out of the 2 line outputs, which are going into the sound card. And I already set that at full volume earlier to make sure it sounds the way I want. Okay, let's do the same thing as recording the bass. I'm going to actually mute the bass so that doesn't confuse me, because the timing of the notes is pretty bad. I'll just go off my original piano track, and let's do a quick recording and see what happens. Okay, that worked out all right, I think. I can work with that. So maybe next I'll go grab an acoustic guitar and I'll get that set up and we'll see what we can do with that. Alright, so we have all the different tracks recorded now for our project, and what I'm going to do next is we'll listen to this, see what it sounds like, but I have no doubt that we'll be able to do some editing to it to actually make it sound better in the end. Now, you've probably just realized a problem. There's only about 5 or 6 minutes left in the video. How am I going to do all that editing in time to make it sound much better? I'm not. I just realized that I don't have enough time. This video is going to be too long for YouTube. So what I'm going to do is break it into 2 parts. So for the rest of this video, in just a minute, I'm going to play through the entire session. You'll be able to hear what the instruments sound like all playing together at the same time. But I'm also going to put a link to the next video in the series at the bottom of the screen. So you can click on that link, jump directly into the next video, which is audio recording tutorial number 4, and that's gonna start off exactly where we're leaving off right here, and we'll go through the session, we'll do all the editing necessary, So we'll be doing volume editing, whether that means changing the overall level of a track or maybe doing automation throughout a track so the volume can change as the track is playing. We'll be doing some panning to place everything in the stereo field where we want to have it so it sounds better. We might have to do some noise reduction, hopefully not, maybe to 1 or 2 tracks, we'll see. We'll be doing some EQing, and I'll teach you why subtractive EQing can be used to reduce the fullness of an instrument, make it only come through in a specific part of the frequency spectrum, and you'll learn why actually cutting it down and making it less full can make it sound better in a mix sometimes. And we'll be doing some reverb, and I don't know yet if we'll be doing that on individual tracks or if we'll wait till we have the master output ready. Okay, so once we've done all our editing and stuff, we will compile all of the individual tracks into a single master track. It's called bouncing. So we're going to bounce all our tracks into a brand new final output track, and that'll be a stereo track. And we may have to do some more processing on that bounced track. We may have to do a little bit more EQ to the mix as a whole. We might want to add a touch of reverb there. We may want to bring the volume up a little bit. We may have to use some hard limiting or some compression. Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll have set things up so that the volume is kind of nice as is, but hard to say. Okay, so let's watch this. You can hear what all the tracks sound like together right now, and just click on the link below and we'll move on to the editing part in the next video.